Okay, so today you are at a PTR-YC training, and that stands for Prevent, Teach, Reinforce for Young Children. I understand that some of you may need to leave at certain times, and that's completely okay. As Lisa said, that we are recording this. So if you miss any of the training, you can. One of the things that we have learned is that we need to be flexible. More so than ever. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Okay, here's our agenda. And today we're only going to get through the first half of functional behavior assessment. So today we'll do some introductions. We'll talk about understanding behavior, form and function behind behavior. And then I'll do a quick overview of PTR-YC. This is a manual training. So I know all of you, or at least most of you, have the PTR-YC manual, which is really important because that's what we're training on today. And we'll go through each step of PTR-YC. For every chapter, pretty much starting at chapter 3, that is a meeting, which is nice. So I highly, highly recommend reading the book at least once. And then anytime that you may be facilitating a PTR-YC meeting, I highly recommend reading that chapter before you actually have that meeting, just so you're getting more acquainted with the process. How this has become manualized is not just that it's a manual, but that there's steps to help create some fidelity of practice. So we're making sure that we're implementing this type of science the way it's supposed to be implemented. So the first step along the way is getting ready, right? Getting your team together, trying to set some goals. And really, it's more than just goal setting. It's more of like just finding out what are the behaviors of concern and what are the possible behaviors that may help if this child learned or if they increased their use of those skills. Then we'll talk about data collection, and then we'll go into functional behavior assessment. As I said, we'll continue with functional behavior assessment tomorrow, and then we'll create behavior intervention plans. These are mock plans, of course. But just so you can get used to using the manual, because you do need to use the manual to create the plans. And then we'll talk about some follow-ups. What happens after a plan has been written? And I'm excited that we're breaking up the day today and tomorrow, because we'll have some more time to have a rich discussion around those follow-ups and progress monitoring. Okay, so here is our pyramid model, and it's really important that we still keep that pyramid model in check. With many PTR-YC cases, you will be using pyramid model strategies. And oftentimes it's using a lot of that relationship piece and the environment. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I know some of you may be new to me. My name's Johanna, and I've been working with pyramid model for, gosh, at least 15 years. When I was in graduate school in Denver, one of my professors was Gail Joseph, who was one of the creators of pyramid model. And when I learned about pyramid model, and I came from a very strict ABA practice, working with children with autism in New Jersey, because I'm from New Jersey, and I went to undergraduate school at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. So I feel close to you all in that way. But I came from a very different approach. I came from a self-contained setting, very behavioral driven. And when I learned about pyramid model, it really opened up my eyes to a new way where we can provide applied behavioral analysis practice with developmental appropriate practice. And this is very true when we're looking at behavior. So when we're looking at that challenging behavior, we need to think of what are those bottom layers of the pyramid that need to be in place to help support that child. So just keeping that our focus and reminding you all that there's a new website at the NCPMI location, which is fantastic. And if you're not subscribed to get updates, I would highly recommend subscribing, just so you're getting all the latest and greatest, which happens usually on a weekly basis. We're sending things out regularly. I currently live in Colorado, and I live in a rural community of Ridgeway near Telluride. So I'm 6 hours away from Denver too, just to give you guys a little demographic of where I'm at now. But I work with the University of Denver with Phil Strain and with NCPMI. Okay, so here is your manual. This is the second PTR that was created. The first PTR was created for school-aged. So kindergarten through, I love Phil too. He is fantastic, Beth Ann. Thanks for that comment. I'll make sure that he knows that you said that too. For school age, which is really nice. I think this is a unique opportunity for us as early childhood professionals, that we're actually using something that we know works in other ages and not just in early childhood, which of course, most of the things that we do in early childhood works for everybody. But so there's a lot of validity when we talk about using PTR-YC and following up in school districts, because wow, we have a manual for that too, which is really helpful for some buy-in. So just to explain a little bit around PTR-YC specifically, we did a 5-year research study, which I was thankfully part of. Glenn Dunlap and Phil really led our team in this. And we were in Colorado and Nevada in multiple different settings. And we worked with preschools around PTR-YC. And then also we had a control group with business as usual. So they can use the pyramid model, 3A, 3B if they wanted to. They could use basically anything they wanted to, except for using the manual. And what we found was extraordinary. One, the behavior plans that we created were created really quick. And met fidelity of practice really quick too. And the outcomes were amazing. Children's behaviors around their behavior support plan increased as far as appropriate behavior increased, and negative behavior decreased significantly. In addition, we also saw a social skill trend increase too in those kids that we studied that were part of the PTR-YC intervention group. So it was a very exciting project and very successful in reporting out our outcomes. Since PTR and PTR-YC, there have been a couple of changes. One, PTR for school age, K through 8th grade, has been revised. So we have a new edition out, and also PTR for families has been created. So this is a guide for families at home and in the community, because we know there's differences in environment and expectations. So another great resource for you all. Okay, so before we jump into intensive individualized intervention, we should consider a few things. And one of the things that I just want you all to do is just do a little reflection. And in the chat, you can share your thoughts after reading this comment and this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So what comes to mind when you read that statement? And or how can you relate this statement to the work that we do with children who are experiencing challenging behavior? Great, thanks, Amanda. It reminds me of the concept of sharing our calm piece with children who are dysregulated. Very nice. Children mirror us. Nice, Leanne. Very true, right? Cindy, love this quote. We get more of what we focus on, absolutely. And Beth Ann, it reminds me of the important work that we need to do, absolutely. And we approach challenging behavior, love, respect, and kindness, absolutely. Lavania, is that how you pronounce your name? I want to get it right.
Yes, Lavanya.
All right.
I forgot the wit there.
With that said, can you think of a different?
All right. Good, Chris. We need to rise above what we are going through. That's right, in order to pave the way for light to continue on. Absolutely. Forgive and not forget. Forgive and forget, Dawn said. Great. Wow, you guys are doing wonderful reflections here. Opposites must exist for us to realize how essential light and love are. Lovely. And then many of the children we work with are in need of supportive, loving adults in their lives. Sometimes the behavior is out of a need for love and caring. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for those reflections. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but some of the things that I see when a child has challenging behavior is this response of adult reactions, right? In sometimes frustration or disapproval or judgment. And it's sometimes really hard not to have those feelings, but we really need to get in check and think about what does the child need. So we have some things to consider when we move through a PTR-YC process, right? Like all interventions, especially intensive in their individualized interventions, it requires time, effort, and a specialized commitment. So you really need to be committed to the process, and that's everybody on the team. We see discrepancy and or some lack of fidelity when the team's not all on the same page. And for that reason, this process is a team approach. So the teacher has to be at every single meeting or the meeting can't happen. So a plan is not written without the teacher being part of this, which is really unique and different in some approaches with creating behavior support plans. But what we know is that if the teacher or teaching team is not involved, we might have a lack of buy-in and therefore a lack of implementation. It's not realistic to implement like multiple PTR-YC cases at one time in one classroom. And what we know about pyramid model, right, is that if we have more than 1 to 5% of children experiencing challenging behavior at the very top of the pyramid, there's usually an adult factor there, right? Whether it's environment, whether it's classroom management, whether it's engaging activities. So there's universal factors that we need to put in place. So it's not fixing the child, it's really looking at what the universal environment's providing for all kids. And then maybe we can help children avoid the need for PTR-YC earlier and less intensive when we look at those classroom-wide strategies. Okay, so in other words, start at the bottom of the pyramid. So we're going to do quite a bit of work around that this morning or this afternoon for you all. It's 9:30 here. I know it's 11:30 for you guys. And so we're really looking at that high quality classroom practices. With PTR-YC, if we notice that those things are not in place, we put that into the plan, especially if a child's experiencing some dangerous behavior or behavior which children or others or adults are being injured. We want to make sure there's a plan in place, but we will also create a plan for universal practices. So I'm going to move through this really quickly. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat. We'll get through it quick, and then we'll take a pause and have you guys work in groups in a bit. Okay, so really important, the effective workforce is critical. As we know, systems and policies need to be in place for us to feel good about coming to work. What we know is that if we're not feeling good, our kids usually aren't feeling all that good either. I don't know if you have been introduced to this chart before. This is managing complex change. It was presented by Tom Nosker at a TASH conference back in the early 90s. And it's an amazing tool to use with teams or yourself when you're really learning a new process. And that is that we need to have all these components in order to make change happen. So we need to have vision. We need to know why we're doing things, right? We need to have the skills or the training to know how to do it. We need some sort of incentives, like what's in it for me? How am I going to benefit? How are my students going to benefit? Resources in implementing these evidence-based practices, and then of course an action plan so we know where to go when we make progress, we could celebrate. And so anyway, if you want, I can add this as a handout. It's a really awesome tool, and or if you want more information about it, certainly feel free to email me, or I can talk more about it tomorrow when we have more time. Okay, so using those universal practices, so we're looking at those relationships and those supportive environments. What we know about challenging behavior is sometimes it's sparked due to a child trying to receive some sort of connection with an adult or others. So we want to really look at how are we connecting with all children in the classroom environment. PTR-YC is designed for the classroom, where PTR-F or PTR for families is designed for home and community. So today we're strictly focusing on classroom, but we want to make sure that we have positive relationships with all kids, even those kiddos that sometimes it's really hard to connect with. When we are only addressing children for their challenging behavior, that really disjoints our connections and can make a big difference in kids' behavior. So as you all know, that hot buttons is a big piece behind this. We don't necessarily talk about it in PTR-YC, but it's something that you want to be attuned with when you're working with teams. Often that very first meeting is a lot of venting or getting out emotions. And sometimes it's good to just get things in check. Like, ooh, I can see that that's really upsetting for you when that child or when that behavior occurs. I can see that you look really upset by that. What are some things that you feel when that occurs, right? And then we could start working on feelings and self-regulating for us as adults too, which is very much a part of this. Okay, and then as we move up the pyramid, as you know, we want to make sure that we have targeted social emotional supports for all kids. What we know is that this is not the best time to focus on challenging behavior, at least teaching challenging behavior when the child is having the challenging behavior. And oftentimes that's when we do see children getting support for challenging behaviors when they're having the challenging behavior. When we really want to focus on this is before the behavior occurs or reflecting after the behavior occurs and making sure we're teaching a replacement behavior. Also, we all know that focusing on social emotional development, and particularly friendships and self-control, can increase children's success in school and also beyond school. There are some really neat videos that just came out, which I will send to Lisa, and maybe Lisa, you could send it to everybody on inclusion and the work done around some of this and how important inclusion is for all kids, not just children with special needs. So there's a lot of benefit, as we know too, and these are some of the benefits for focusing on emotional literacy and social development. Okay, so here we are, we're at that intensive intervention. The pyramid model trainings are being revised, and for you all to know, 3A, 3B is going to be PTR-YC. So it's going to look more like the training that you're receiving right now. Okay, so here's our starting point, right? One of the first things we have to figure out is, what is a child trying to tell us when we're seeing challenging behavior? We need to know that when we see a challenging behavior, this strictly equals some sort of communication. Child's trying to tell us something either that they need or that they want, or something that they want to get away from or not even go to. And children use challenging behavior because it works for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it, especially those continued persistent challenging behaviors. So our response to behavior has a lot to do with why children continue to use challenging behavior. And lastly, we need to be really focused on what is the context of that challenging behavior. So I work with a team out in Nashville, and one of the students is having a challenging behavior during lunchtime. And when I learning more about where this challenging behavior is coming from, I'm hearing that, oh, when they're eating lunch, there's a video that they're watching, and it's 45 minutes. And there isn't a clear understanding of what you do when you're done with lunch. And those variables alone, to me, scream out, wow, I'm surprised only one child's having challenging behavior, right? So it's not necessarily that the child, that something's wrong with the child. It's more like we need to figure out what's going on in the environment and how to make that environment more successful for that child. Okay, so here is some additional really cool concepts and approach of thinking that some of you have this. You know, if a child doesn't know how to read, we teach them. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach them. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach them. If a child doesn't know how to drive, thank goodness preschoolers don't drive, we teach them. But if a child doesn't know how to behave, what do? Do we teach them or do we punish them? And unfortunately, a lot of times I see the punishment reaction versus the, ooh, let's take a moment and figure out what's going on. What does the child need to say? And so we need to get better at finishing this statement as, when a child doesn't know how to behave, that is also an opportunity for us to teach. Okay, how are you all doing? Okay, so we're gonna move through this as far as what is challenging behavior. This comes strictly from PTR-YC, which is a derivative of pyramid model. So this probably looks really familiar to you. So we define challenging behavior as any repeated pattern and behavior that interferes with learning or engagement, right? So what we know is if children are engaged in the daily routines, we see a very low incidence of challenging behavior. So engagement is a big thing that we need to stay focused on. But when we see that interference, that is a sign for us, like, ooh, okay, we need to help support this child a little more. Or with all those lovely things that you do with pyramid model, looking at those bottom layers of the pyramid, if we have those in place and the child's still having a hard time or not making much change in their behavior with those supports, then that can cue us in like, wow, we really need to help support this child. With that said, I want you all to know that it takes some time to get those pyramid model strategies in place too. So it's not that we expect perfection all the time, but ideally we're trying to achieve a high fidelity of practice using the teapot to measure our progress. And then also these specific forms of behavior like tantrums, prolonged tantrums, right? Physical or verbal aggression, disruptive vocal or motor behaviors, screaming, right? Property destruction, self-injurious behavior, non-compliance, and one that often gets left out is this withdrawn behavior. Now, I am not sure, I'm not allowed in any classrooms. I get to Zoom into classrooms or swivel classrooms, but I have not stepped foot in a classroom since last early spring, late winter. But I'm assuming based on what I'm hearing is there's some withdrawn behavior happening with some of our students. And that's something that can also lend to a PTR-YC. Okay. All right. Okay, so PTR-YC is based on positive behavior supports. Glenn Dunlop was actually one of the founding fathers of PBIS, or what used to be called PBS, but then public broadcasting systems weren't too psyched with multiple people calling them about challenging behavior. So we changed it, or I didn't change it, but they changed it to positive behavior intervention supports. So with this said, we're really looking at replacing the challenging behavior with a positive behavior. So what is the child in need of learning in order to make their needs met to honor that function of behavior? And pyramid model fits into PBIS supports too. So again, a very nice complementary approach. So the factors behind this is we're really looking at prevention strategies, right? With those universal approaches, that commitment to a successful outcome, that we're all here together to make a difference for this child. Some of you may be familiar with Mark Duran. He does work around all sorts of things behaviorally. He's out of University of South Florida. He's done extensive work with children with special needs, children with autism, in particularly around sleep or positive behavior supports. But one of his latest research projects has been around optimism. And he did a whole study around optimistic parenting. And the outcome of that study was quite amazing and successful. And the key factor that they found, it didn't matter the intensity of the challenging behavior that the child had and or the severity of the child's disability. The key factor was the optimism of their parents in their child. So believing that they're not horrible parents, that they're doing the best they can, and that their child has these values. The one component that he saw that was one of the factors that kept the challenging behavior of going away and the appropriate behavior increasing was this pessimistic mindset of a child. So just reflect for a moment. Think about some kids that you've seen or you've worked with challenging behavior, and reflect on if you've heard a lot of negative, pessimistic opinion about that child. And if you've heard some optimistic comments about that child too. So what we know is that that mindset makes a difference. So we're committed to a successful outcome. We're coming to the table with, there's got to be something we can do to help. We implement the plan to fidelity. That is one of the things that we learned from the study, is that 100% fidelity of practice of the plan made the biggest difference for our study. The capacity of the team. You know, I worked on teams that were maybe 7 people were on the team. I worked with teams where it was just myself, the coach, and the teacher. So there's a varying size, and it just depends upon capacity of the team and availability of team members. And then family involvement. At all times, we love to have family involvement, and we'll talk about families after this section here. Okay, so I have shared this verbally with you all, but to be a little bit more precise, we did work in, oh good, I see a comment here. Thanks. Okay, I wonder if optimism varies by culture, how you see yourself able to make change. That is a really good comment, and one that I can look into, and I will, because I'm sure that they had some demographics around that. And there's a lot of work going on around optimism. Okay, I wrote that down as a follow-up. So the study, we worked in Head Start, early Head Start, preschool. There was a toddler room that we actually worked in, because it's designed for 2.5-year-olds to 5-year-olds. So it's really like that preschool age. But in one of the classrooms I actually got to work in, it was an older toddler group. So it was appropriate to use school district preschools. So it was a whole variety, community-based preschools in rural communities and urban communities. Okay, so a little bit more. This is very familiar to you guys, I'm sure, with PBIS and pyramid model, but some of the nuances around, or some of the discrete components to PTR-YC here is that, one, of course, it's all research-based, and in your manuals in the back, which we'll talk about a lot more tomorrow, are these appendixes. And the appendix is related to a menu, to an intervention menu. For every intervention that's mentioned in this manual, you have the references of where the research comes from, why this is a successful intervention. So that gives you some validity in what you're doing and what types of interventions you're using. As I mentioned before, it is a team approach. It cannot be written without the teacher. And ideally, if the child has an IEP, that their special education team is part of this as well, or if there's a pyramid model coach, that they're part of it. If families can be involved, of course, we want families to be involved too. Okay, and then it truly is designed for the teachers and the regular education staff to implement. Okay, so we are really trying to create a system so everyone could have supports within their environments, whether in community-based, school district-based, whether you have access to a BCBA or you do not have access to a BCBA. What we did find from the research, and something that we're going to look further into, and this is being revised too, we're putting more emphasis on how to facilitate these meetings. And we also acknowledge that it is important for that facilitator to have a behavior, to have experience in behavior, to understand behavior positive behavior supports to understand the function of behavior too. Okay, and then lastly, really that emphasis on that manualized, right? There's scripts in here. We have 4 case studies, which are excellent to read. You can see how each of the meetings were conducted based on the forms that were created. Also, for every step, there's a self-assessment for the team. Did you do X, Y, and Z, right? So that we ask all teams to do. And then, as I mentioned before, that intervention menu. So there is a lot of empirical evidence that supports PTR-YC as being successful. So itself is now an evidence-based practice. So that was the outcome of our research study, which was very exciting. Okay, so let's, you know what, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second, just so I could see you all. Hi. I don't like not seeing you. Now I could see you. Okay, so let's just open it up because I've been talking way too much and have a discussion around what are some challenging behaviors for you, or what do you define challenging behavior as, or what are the challenging behaviors that you hear often are bothering people? And you can verbally say it, or you know, we have a nice group, a nice size here. Defiance.
Hi, my name is Marissa. I'm from East Haven preschool program. Some of the challenging behaviors we are seeing is the lack of communication that the children are coming in with, the lack of language, and a lot of that stems with frustration and different kind of behaviors. So really making those connections and understanding the root and trying to decipher if this is a language barrier because we have various cultures in our program, or if there is something, a developmental delay. But we have recently seen an influx of students that are coming in at 2.9 years old with that lack of language development. So once they get into this type of environment, really making those, intentional connections becomes quite challenging. Yeah. And so it's, supporting the staff on how to really, manage that and is one of the things that we're working on, and really being patient and intentional. But because of COVID, we haven't been able to go into the homes and do our home visits. So it's been quite a challenge for us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that is a big variable that we're all missing. At first what I was hearing, oh, we're connecting more with our families because we're seeing them via Zoom, but we are missing that home piece. We're missing the seeing families in the classroom because they're usually not allowed in the classroom. So with COVID and those restrictions, we have some barriers. But in addition, I'm hearing you say that lack of communication, those verbal communication skills you're seeing are maybe not as sophisticated in some of the children entering preschool for varying reasons. Potentially child learning multiple languages or learning English.
And not only with the the ELL, but we also see that parents are busy and they're working, and even in my own personal, I have 2 great nephews, and they give them the iPad, the cell phone, and the children are we're not having that language, they're not exposed to those conversations, and we're not modeling that kind of type of interaction. So when they come, we sometimes forget that, just because how we were brought up, don't assume that that's how it is in another family's home. So we have to kind of, give everybody a clear slate and work with what we have to help build it up, but really look at the root of it, the why.
Mhm.
And I'm noticing now that we need to give our students time before we throw a label on them, and give them that exposure, and enough experiences before we say, oh, this child's autistic, or this child is this, or we need more time. And I think from my perspective, as a program manager, I've been encouraging that, like, let's just give them time. We've been, some of our classrooms had a quarantine. This hasn't been a typical year. Let's give them time and navigate through this. They're only 3.
Right. Thank you so much. I think your thoughts and perspective are very important. One actually came up in our NCPMI meeting, was this idea of time. Kids are going to need more time, and we're going to need to maybe provide a little more love, and which can be challenging because there's distant, physical distance and this and that. But what we know is kids need love. We need love.
Yeah. I
So,
want to echo what Marissa said too, because I'm hearing from every program I work with that I mentioned this to you, Johanna, at the beginning, teachers that are, we have the most amazing teachers, and they've been in the field for 20 or more years, and they're seeing behaviors that they haven't seen before, and the number of different children with behaviors, and that language development that Marissa spoke of. I've heard that from every teacher I've talked to, something about this year of COVID. And I think Marissa really hit on it with the technology and just the passive, that it's really a concern I'm hearing over and over from families and teachers. So thank you for sharing that, Marissa. Johanna, there's also quite a few in the chat. I just want to make sure you knew of those.
yeah, thank you so much. I've been taking notes as well, and I really appreciate, again, the comments that you made. And what it's so nice to see you all. Or I'm not seeing everybody, but I can see responses and head nodding, like, yes, you're seeing that too. So one, right, if we know this is a possible common problem, what are some supports outside, like, that we can, like, thinking outside the box? And of course, this is a little bit above and beyond PTR-YC, but can we help families understand the impact, right? And families are so overwhelmed too, but the impact of being on devices, the impact on what that correlates to a child. Someone said it before too, that children they mirror what they see, right? And so if we are non-responsive, children will be non-responsive. So it's easier said than done. I realize this, but those are sometimes those universal practices that we need to think about too, on how we reach out to families, which is, and it's not always a family issue too, it's just sometimes what's happening around us. So in addition to the lack of communication, we're seeing defiance, physical aggression, nonverbal aggression, like, so children who are nonverbal, who are having aggression, going back to that lack of communication. If I don't have words to communicate, then I'm going to use what I have. Anger. So we're seeing an increase in anger types of behavior. And then just saying no, right? And language barriers. And then hurting others and hurting themselves intentionally. And self-injurious behavior is a very serious behavior, and one that we would want to address immediately, because what can happen, and again, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with this one, but endorphins can be set off when a child experiences physical pain, especially endured by themselves. And therefore, now we're dealing with multiple things. We're dealing with behavioral as well as a physical effect too. So yes, these are definitely concerning behaviors. One of the things with anger, we would want to really look at what are those types of behaviors that we notice that make us think of anger, right? Are we seeing clenching? Are we seeing screaming? Are we seeing like falling to the ground, running out of the room, right? Those types of behaviors. So, and then, you're such a well-versed team and group, this idea of what does that do to us when those behaviors occur? And Phil Duran, I know some of you know him, he is my boss, he's my mentor. He is the one that says, that's the behavior we need to figure out. Meaning like the behavior that is pressing our button is going to affect our response. Therefore, we can inadvertently reinforce this type of behavior, not even realizing it. So it's good to have those definitions. It's also good to know what are those behaviors that are really getting to that teacher, to the family, to the kids, right? So have we seen kids maybe respond differently when a child's experiencing challenging behavior? Sure, right? I don't want to play with you. I'm going to go play over here. And we don't want that, right? We really want to promote this. We gotta figure out, we gotta learn that we're all different, but like teach ways to tolerate, teach ways to say, no, that hurts me, but I want to play with you. Or I need a break right now. When you're calm, I'll come over and play with you. So there's a really great visual, and I will present it tomorrow, and it's called the ripple effect. And so I'll present that. So you have to come back tomorrow to see it. So let's see, I'm gonna write that down, ripple effect. Okay, awesome. Thanks everybody. I'm gonna be conscious of your time too. It is okay, great. Here we go. Now I can't see you for a bit, but I will be back. Can't wait to see you again. All right. All right, so here are some of these comments that we might hear, right? And this is this more feeling defeated, feeling I don't know what else to do. This is where sometimes we could go down the rabbit hole of pessimistic mindset. And not to say you can't be a human and you can't think, gosh, I just can't deal with this again, right? But when this is the story that we're telling ourselves on a daily basis, this is where we're gonna get stuck. So they're doing it to me again. I've tried everything. She needs to go somewhere else. She's just not ready for this classroom. He does it all the time. And what do you expect? You know, he's a Smith. I had his brother last year, same thing. Or it's a sensory thing. And not to say the sensory thing, it's not to say that we're not conscious and we're not going to teach kids how to help themselves either seek or avoid certain sensory input, but the fact of we don't address it as a behavioral thing because it's a sensory thing, right? It's together, we need to work together on that. Honoring sensory needs, and also how we could teach behaviorally for that child to get their needs met. So there are two functions of all behavior, or there's possibilities for two functions, and that's for adults too. So it's either to escape or avoid. So there's a difference between escape and avoid. One is escaping is I'm in circle time right now, but I'm going to do some sort of behavior so I can exit, so I can escape that. Or it's transition to circle time and I'm not even going there. I'm avoiding, right? So see the difference there. There is a subtle difference between them, and we may actually, that may change our intervention approach, right? So with an avoidant behavior, we're doing a lot of preventative, right? First, then, those types of things. With escape behavior, to me, that's saying, wow, we need to increase the rate of reinforcement. And we need to also think about what is happening during circle time. What's the time length of circle time, right? So there's other variables that we might want to consider. And then the other is to obtain. I want the toy, or I want the person, I want the activity. So that's another, right? So learning how to ask, request, I want attention. So we want to make sure that we get as clear as we can with the function. Why is the child doing this behavior? And so again, this is Phil, my mentor, speaking to me as sometimes we get so stuck on the form of the behavior, like spitting, hitting, kicking, that we get so stuck in the mindset of that particular behavior that we miss the point of what is the function of that behavior. Okay, because that's what we need to address, is the function. Okay, so here's just a visual example of different things. Remember, I said something about sensory. So some kids want to get sensory input and some kids want to avoid it. So how can we help kids honor their function by saying, I need a break, or it's too loud, or can you give me a hug? And I say that and I cringe because I know some of you can't give kids hugs right now. But that we need to teach kids that versus just saying it's a sensory thing. Okay, so here, some of you might be familiar with this equation. It's called a behavioral equation, where we're looking at that antecedent, what happens before the behavior, what is the behavior, what happens after the behavior. So here's the trigger for Evan is playing with Duplos, but he can't get them connected, right? Very common preschool situation here. His behavior is he looks up at the adult, he fusses, cries a little, he holds the block up to the adult, and the adult looks at it, right? So that's the behavior. And then the maintaining consequence is that the adult helps put the blocks together without prompting for additional communication. So what is the function of behavior? Right? This is pretty clear, and it is to get help, right? To seek, to obtain help or assistance. This is a lovely scenario, right? And in some cases, this is amazing, right? Children handing us something, we're getting joint attention, we're getting reciprocity in the adult responding. What we would want to see is this shaping, right? We want to see the adult saying, I need help, right? Modeling. So we can model that language to help that child learn, oh, when I say help, I get the help that I want, I get what I want, and then I'm feeling satisfied. This is how I receive my assistance, by asking for help, right? So this is a behavior equation, which we need to think of actually positive behavior too. Sometimes we only think of these equations as negative behavior equations, but they could be positive behavior equations as well. Okay, signs of things getting better. So acknowledging the behaviors that upset you, acknowledging the behaviors that please you, right? Collecting data when, where, and whom the behavior occurs, celebrating any changes for the better, and then becoming a resource for others. So, hey, yeah, a couple of years ago, I had a similar situation occur in my classroom. I'd love to share some information with you if you're ready for it. That type of stuff. Okay, so this mindset shifts. I was in an interview yesterday with a teacher, actually a kindergarten teacher, because we're starting to branch out to kindergarten with pyramid model, which is so exciting. And the teacher actually happened to be my child's kindergarten teacher. But she was saying that one of the biggest things that she has learned through pyramid model is that she looks at behavior differently. So instead of thinking something's wrong or that child, you know, is inappropriately behaving and needs to go to the principal's office, she is shifting her mindset to, what is it about this routine that I might need to change to help support that child? What is it that that child is trying to tell me so I could help support them? So it's just that mind shift change. Okay, so here are some reframing from defeat into inquiries, right? So what is he trying to tell me? Is there something that they would like, or is there something they want to get away from? Have I been acknowledging that child for them being on task, right? So your work with pyramid model, what we know when we teach behavior expectations, we want to make sure that we're addressing the positive behavior more than the inappropriate behavior, right? That's universally. So are we doing that for all kids or just some kids? And we want to make sure that we're doing it for all. And do they understand the routines? One of the comments made yesterday in the interview with this kindergarten teacher was, wow, I realized that the paraprofessionals coming into my classroom or the volunteers, they didn't know how to do the routines. If they don't know how to do the routines, how do my kids know how to do the routines? And so that brought to light to her, wow, I need more visual supports so all people know what to do. Does the child have friends? So what we know, kids that don't have tight, not that they have to be tight, but that have a social network can tend to have more challenging behavior due to the fact that they're trying to get some sort of attention. And then what may they be feeling right now? How are they feeling? Right? Did we check in? Are you feeling, you know, 3, 4, 5-year-olds can't tell us exactly what's going on with them all the time, but we can do a check-in. We could do a feeling check-in. And then do we need to teach self-regulation and calming techniques to children? And so what you know about pyramid model too is that you have tools to help teach, and I have a turtle somewhere, to help teach children with self-regulation and calming. And sometimes we don't teach it enough. Sometimes it's not embedded enough in our regular routines. And so that can be a cue for us too. Okay, I realize I'm talking a lot. You're going to be breaking up into groups soon, so bear with me. One of the key components and nuances with PTR-YC is that we do a universal or classroom-wide check. This happens during the functional behavior assessment currently. In the revision, it's most likely going to happen in the beginning of the process. And that's just a check-in on whether the classroom is adhering to these universal practices that we know if you implement reduced challenging behavior. Is that 1 ratio, positive to negative? Are we addressing children 5 times more than 1 around giving 5 positives to positive behavior versus a correction, a question, redirection, criticism, So we want to make sure we're maintaining that 5-to-1. This research comes from John Gottman's work out of Seattle. And he originally did this work in, actually he has done this work around marriage and relationships with adults. And just so y'all know that this is just one of the ratios that came out, was the 5-to-1 as being the optimal for a happy marriage. But the ultimate was 20-to-1, which is extraordinary. And for some of our kids, that's what they need. They need a 10 or 20-to-1. What always led to divorce, the ratio that always led to divorce, was a 0.8-to-1. And so in reflection, think about some of the kids that you've observed or worked with, and think about, was that ratio closer to that 8-to-1? Or was it closer to that 5-to-1? Or was it closer to that 20-to-1 in circumstances? And so when we think about divorce, to me, the equation goes to expulsion or suspension. And that is just unacceptable with our young kids. So this is a very, very, very important strategy, and one that we usually implement and come back to often in our coaching practices. So predictable schedules. So having that visual daily schedule is essential, and that it's reviewed often, and that we have some sort of systems behind that. In addition to each one of those activities, that we have established routines within routines within routines to all of those activities. And that sometimes takes a bit of time and practice and finesse from the team. That we're teaching behavior expectations, and in addition to teaching, that we're reinforcing positive behavior expectations on a regular basis. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're directly teaching peer-related social skills. So we have the idea of friendship and learning how to be social and learning how to navigate the social world on a regular basis. So these are just some visuals around that as I talk about it. If you're not familiar or less familiar with routines within routines within routines, this is a very powerful tool as well. If you want more information on it, I certainly don't mind sharing. But generally speaking, we use these 4 questions to help guide what those routines look like. And that is, what am I supposed to do? How do I know I'm making progress? When do I know when I'm done? And what do I do next? And so in this example, you can see like the daily schedule. That first routine is the whole day. That next breakdown of routine is, well, what does open circle look like? So then you see all the different activities within opening circle. And then even more so, well, then within that, what does what does calendar look like? And then you break that down. We break down every one of those activities and every one of those second routine activities to the third routine. So that we have more examples that I can show you if you want. Okay, and then making sure that we're directly teaching those social skills is critical. And reinforcing. All right. So what are some thoughts? What were some of the reflections that you had based on those 5 universal practices?
I would start. This is Shailene. What we discuss as those practices are so essential right now in real time, underneath the being short-staffed, dealing with a lot of social emotional new factors that our children are coming in with, and partnering. It's just really difficult to really stay consistent with them.
Yeah, that's a really good reflection, because oftentimes, especially if you've been through pyramid model trainings as often as you have, and been living and breathing this for a couple of years, a few years, you've seen those before, right? You're like, oh yeah, we know those. But what I'm hearing is sometimes we're thinking we've got them in place, but they're not necessarily in place, or we need to reevaluate, or we need to adjust, right? And maybe ramp it up a bit. Good, that's a great reflection. Any other reflections on that?
Yeah, I was in the same breakout session, and we did talk about staffing, you know, in particular, just about, you know, that first, I would just say, I think that tool is very useful, but a lot of what is contained in there, you know, we have a lot of turnover of staff. We did pre-COVID, but since the pandemic started, we've seen a lot more of that. So it's tough to get staff trained to a place where they can implement a lot of this, and then to maintain that. Then you have to look also with, you know, staff having to be out due to COVID reasons or non-COVID reasons. And so you're putting people in the class that aren't familiar with routines. And so even the most well-functioning classroom, you know, can hit a snag when a head teacher's out or an assistant teacher's out and people aren't so familiar with the classroom routines and processes that are in place.
Wow, that's everything you said there is really impactful, right? This turnover that we've experienced in staffing, training, maintaining practice, and then the whole, you know, being out, having substitutes coming in, if you can find substitutes coming in. Yeah, so it's that in itself is a ripple effect. So with that said, going back to what Shailene was saying, is the need and this necessity for getting those really in place. So we have a visual representation too of those routines within routines within routines. So it doesn't matter who comes in, you see it, and still it's not a perfect, you know, situation, but at least there's a visual representation. And when it's done so predictably, the kids are then the teachers, right? Because they really learn that, and it can help guide one another. So, those are really great reflections on that. What we know about those 5 universal practices is that when those are in place, we see a significant reduction in challenging behavior. And sometimes what we have to look at is, do we have to make any individualized adaptations for kids, right? And oftentimes we think of that as, you know, that intensive intervention. But if we look at it more in this universal approach, it makes it more inclusive, right? Because we don't all learn the same. We do need to have varying things. What I heard from that interview with the teacher yesterday was she has auditory type cues too, in addition to visual cues. I'm like, that's brilliant, right? She has a chime for cleanup and then a xylophone for transitioning, which is really, and she uses the same thing every day. So the kids know, oh, now we're going to do this. So for those kids that are more auditorily strong, that can really help. So great. Any other reflections before we give our eyes a break?
Hi, this is Shanika from HRA. My group and I, we discussed how important it is for us to have staff buy-in, because if we don't, then they're not going to implement it. At my agency, I see that there are some classrooms who implement these practices effortlessly, but then others, they have, you know, a harder time. So we wonder, like, what's attributing to that? Could it be the staff buy-in, or is it something else?
Really good perspective, right? That staff buy-in is critical. And if those of you that are familiar with the benchmarks of quality, that's the #1 thing, right? The staff buy-in. And when we don't have that buy-in, we definitely have an infidelity of practice. So what is that, right? What is the key to get that staff buy-in? And so, of course, that's a different training in itself, but that's part of this work too, especially when you're diving into PTR-YC, you got to be bought in. This is all, we're all in on this one. And we're all at the table, so we're agreeing upon what we're going to try. Okay, so chapter 1 is that introduction, and really, again, it's just really reviewing the evidence-based practices around positive behavior supports, that we're looking at prevention strategies. We've talked about all of this previous, okay? So that's chapter 1, really quick. Then chapter 2 is that family component. I mentioned to you that studies, oh no, that's that chime. You heard that, right? Why is it chiming?
I don't know. We also get some swishing noises that sound like an ultrasound.
You know, that could be my mouse making noise.
Oh, okay.
But that, and if you continue getting the ultrasound sound, just let me know. If that binging continues, I will try to remedy that too in a break, okay? So there's 4 case studies, which I, again, highly recommend looking at. You can see some differences in family dynamics. You can see differences in kids. You could see differences on how teams filled out forms too. So it gives you this perspective that this is based on team, right? And every team is different. So we value that. Family partnership is critical, however, not always available. So one of the things that we value is engaging and maintaining positive relationships with families, and ideally before a behavior plan is needed. So that's a critical component, especially with prevention strategies, that we want to maintain those behaviors. First, you know, establish them and then maintain them. And then making sure that families can contribute. And sometimes that looks different, right? Whether they can physically be at meetings and or that they're debriefed or they're briefing us. I've worked in situations where families like mom and dad can be in the same room together. So we would do 2 separate meetings, both meetings being recorded. Worked with grandparents, worked with bus drivers, worked with babysitters. So primary caregivers being part of a child's behavior plan is helpful. And remembering that the PTR-YC process is for the classroom implementation. However, we can learn a lot from families on what works for them and what works for them at home. By the way, I see you all right now on my screen, which is fantastic. So I will share a quick story with you. One of the PTR-YC cases that we had early on in the study, we were working with a family. Actually, this was even, it was out of the study, it was before the study. And so this little girl was having extreme challenging behaviors. She would pick up furniture and throw it across the room. She knocked down groups of children. She was itty bitty. She was a tiny little petite little girl, but had a lot of energy when she was upset. And we invited, obviously, the family to the meeting. The mom was very timid and very uncomfortable being at this meeting. And as we started talking, we were talking about some of the behaviors that we were seeing at school, if they had experienced some of those behaviors at home. Clearly, home and school looks different, right? She had a baby sister, but didn't have other peers at home. But she had witnessed similar behaviors, such as when it was time to turn off the computer at home, she would have explosive behaviors. And as we're talking to mom, she said, but I realized that when I don't tell her, and when the clock tells her that it's time to get off the computer, she's able to do it no problem. And that was a key tip for the team to hear, because they were like, wait a second, we can totally set up a system like that in the classroom. using timers or using clocks. So they implemented that, and within that 1 day of implementation, they saw a reduction in challenging behavior. So it was something that, yeah, it doesn't seem like that out of the blue. Well, why wouldn't you have used it? But, you know, sometimes when teaching teams are so head deep in a behavior, the emotional part is involved. You've got other things going on in your classroom, and you may not have thought of that one thing. And that parent bringing it to the team was this light switch, and really brought a lot of success, to the point where then they started looking at other behaviors that she was having, or other functions to the behaviors, and then integrating, well, if we're not telling her, but a picture's telling her, then will it be successful? And it was. So, so we can learn a lot from families, and especially if we set the tone that they're a contributor to the team. They're not there to hear what we have to tell you. Listen what we're going to tell you about your kid, right? That doesn't feel so good when it's like, hey, we would love to learn from you what works from home. What do you think should we try or not try, right? Based on experience. Okay, so families may be included to any extent that they can. And we say that because there are some times where families just can't be present. They can't come to meetings due to time, due to this, due to that. And not to take any judgment out of that, but to work with the family and make sure they feel comfortable and have knowledge in what when those meetings are and what will be discussed during those meetings, and debriefing them with them, but knowing that that a behavior support plan can continue. This is aside from, say, an IEP meeting, right? An IEP meeting can't necessarily continue without a parent being involved, but this as a behavior support plan standalone through PTR-YC can. Any questions about that? Okay. So there's some additional resources that we really value. Obviously, NCPMI. That is the group that I work with, is family engagement. We are actually just finishing the final touches of the revision of positive solutions for families. So that will be coming out soon, which is very exciting. But there are a lot of resources on the website around engaging and involving families. And then also the early childhood mental health consultants website is very helpful for working with families too. There's many others, of course. So, okay, that's chapter 1 and chapter 2. Pretty quick, but very important. So here's your first meeting. Okay, this is the step to meeting 1. So we've established a need for proceeding with a PTR-YC case, and we want to make sure that we're gathering the team together, who should be part of the team, and when are those meetings going to occur. That would be my suggestion, is you start mapping that out in the beginning versus setting up a meeting every time you meet. It's nice to be able to work with the team, maybe during this first meeting, on coming up with dates that work for everybody. We try to be pretty consistent in meeting weekly, so we could get a plan written within a month, which is pretty good for a behavior support plan. And then what we should see once the plan is written and the plan is implemented at a high fidelity, we should see within 8 to 10 days positive effect in behavior change. So with the PTR-YC study, within 2 months, some of our kids already met their goal in the behavior support plan. So we only had 3 months with with all of our kids. They were per semester, and most met in 2 months, but within 3 months, majority of our kids met their goals. So, okay, getting the team together. That now looks a lot more virtual than it used to be. But here's one silver lining to that is this can create more opportunities now that we know how to Zoom and get people connected distantly. We may be able to get more families involved or specialists that usually aren't able to participate due to timing or location. So what we do is really have an opportunity to come and gather and discuss and talk about what's happening. What are some of those concerning behaviors that we're noticing? Sometimes you hear a laundry list. You hear those words like, we've tried everything. This happens all day long. And it's okay. It's as far as we need to let teachers and adults kind of share. And then you can help shape how that discussion goes with those strategies that I mentioned before, as far as, wow, it sounds like this has been really hard for you. Okay, so let's focus on one target behavior. So that's what we do with PTR-YC, which is a little different than other behavior support plans. Previous, when I used to write behavior support plans, either by myself, which would happen sometimes, or with teams, we would, did you hear that? I did too. All right. I'm going to get through this one slide, and then I'm going to pause and I'm going to eliminate that somehow. So we would have sometimes 3 or 5 behaviors that we were focusing on. And for each one of those behaviors, right, there could possibly be a different type of function, right? Now we have the teachers doing all sorts of things, and that is exhausting. So what we learned is if we target just one behavior, and we even go deeper than that, we then target just one time during the day for the teachers to work on that skill, that new skill that they're learning as far as intervention. But we start with focusing on one target behavior. We have found so much success in that because sometimes, remember what Phil, my mentor, says, is it's not about the form, it's about the function, right? And so if we get the function figured out, then the child can learn to generalize and use that skill in other areas, right? And we can too, the strategies that we put in place for that child. So we get more value by focusing on one. So for instance, you might have a child that you're working with that may have tendencies to hit or to bite or to kick or to shake friends, right? We might define that as aggressive behavior, right? So we can address the aggressive behaviors, which would be defined as hitting, biting, kicking, shaking friends. Does that make sense? So it's not that, because we might see hitting at one time and kicking at another, and but we could cluster it as long as it has a clear operational definition, which we'll be doing some activities around. After we work through this team meeting and talk about all the behaviors that we're noticing, and then have the team decide on focusing on one behavior, then coming up with an operational definition of what that behavior is, then we start shedding some light on, well, what are some behaviors that you would like to see the child learn, right? What are some behaviors that you think the child can benefit from learning and or getting more fluid in using? And so ideally we see another laundry list of some positive behaviors. Now at this point, it's only our best guess. We haven't even done a functional behavior assessment yet, but the team may decide to focus on a particular skill that they know that if the child can increase will help with the reduction of the challenging behavior. There's some cases where it's really clear, and there's some cases where it's not so clear. So then the team decides what they may want to focus on as a positive behavior. And then we would create an operational definition around that as well. So before I show you those documents and start working through those activities, I'm going to introduce you to Jackson. And some of you have seen Jackson before. And we're going to walk through Jackson's behavior support plan during this training today and tomorrow. So here is just an introduction to Jackson. He is in a community-based program. This is Center Time. And he is wearing a white shirt. You'll see him, he has dark hair. And I will try to point him out as we are watching the video. So it's about 3 minutes long, and just take note of what are some of the behaviors that you're seeing. Remember, this is a good opportunity to use some of your objective observations, like what are you seeing, what are you hearing, not what you're thinking he's thinking, okay? All right, so here we go. Here's Jackson.
Oh, okay. Remember to get your name. You know what, Max, you might need to ask him if you can have it.
Put it in the now an A. Will be only
It's busy right now.
that, and now a circle.
Are you still in the center? Alex, I see your name over in the program place. That's all your name. Stay over here on this side.
Get lots of color on it.
Miss Diane, I think we have a few.
Jason, let's go finish.
Oh, wait. Jason right there.
Come on, let's go finish. And then we're going to put sprinkles on it.
Remember to get out.
Okay. Oh, you want to do some more? And just spread it all over your pumpkin.
$50. Stop.
He
Wow, this doesn't look too sick. Are you okay?
Yes.
It is so scary.
Was there a problem?
Yes.
What was the
The
problem?
problem was him.
What happened?
What were some of the behaviors that you noticed in Jackson? Okay, taking toys from peers, taking toys from friends, pushing, pulling, attempting to bite. Great. Aggression. Yes. Yep, aggression. Good. Great. Really nice. As far as describing what the behavior that you saw, delay, time, and stuff. Grabbing toys, biting, and laughing, pushing and pulling. Persistence for what they want. Okay. Now, what are some things you noticed about the environment? We had small space, right, for many kids, very crowded. Great, great observation. Busy. Teacher had cell phone in her hand, very crowded, yes. Limited toys, no multiples, only one camera, yeah. Yep, the sign said 2 children in the area. I want you to take note of that because when you see Jackson's post video, I'm going to have you take note, that's tomorrow, I'm going to have you take note of the environmental changes that were made. This, I can share a little bit more. So this teacher was well versed in pyramid model strategies. She was actually a coach, certified coach, and I know the teacher personally. She was trained as a coach here too in Colorado. And so she had a lot of experience. And the little boy was not receiving services in the school. He wasn't identified, but there was suspect that he may be on the autism spectrum, but again, was not identified. So he was receiving occupational therapy at home. This is who was involved in Jackson's team meetings. His mom, the teacher, the co-teacher, which is lovely. I have to say, I mean, it's rare that you could get 2 teachers together outside of the classroom, but it is really nice when you have, if there are 2 teachers in the classroom or more, when you get everybody together, because the perspectives are so different about what is challenging behavior or what they're seeing versus the other person. So it's really nice to get both or all adults who are in the classroom together. 2 members of the school administration. So in this particular program, that was the school director, as well as they had an inclusion specialist. And then the PTR-YC facilitator who was working on our team during the research. Okay, so this is going to be interesting because you're not in set breakout rooms. If you want to be with someone, just let me know and I will get you hooked up with your buddies. If you're in the same room, you don't have to do a breakout room. That you're lucky. You could chat with your buddy. But what I want you to do is, and you could do this with anybody really, is just reflect. Is there someone, thanks Debbie, is there someone, and I don't know who the TVCCA team.
If you rename yourself on your, does everyone know how to do that? You can rename yourself and then just put TVCCA at the end. We do have people who are in the same room, so thank you, Johanna. If you're in the same room, please Yeah, and East Hartford also. So Eliza, if all of you just rename and put East Hartford, then Johanna will see who to put in one room, and then the rest of us can kind of go together, because there are a lot of programs with just 1 or 2 people here as well.
Yeah, because this could be a nice opportunity just to reflect. Are you currently either working with any children that you feel like would benefit from PTR-YC? And do they meet the requirements necessary to go through PTR-YC? And what's that evidence that supports that? That's like if you've been taking behavior data, or if you've witnessed prolonged concerning behavior. Just have a discussion on what's the climate right now in the environments that you're working with. So from this point on, when we do some breakout room groups, you can talk about specific kids. You can talk about Jackson, the case study that we have, or you could talk about some of the really just the processes around PTR-YC too. So it's really just a learning opportunity to brainstorm together. So one of the big things with this is that, for instance, sometimes it's hard to think about what the alternative behavior is going to be as the end result to the behavior support plan. For instance, that scenario that I mentioned earlier, that the child avoiding or escaping circle time. And if the alternative behavior that we all come up with, since the child's trying to escape circle time and currently now they're running or they're plowing their friends over, rolling, like steamrolling over friends, and then they're getting exited out of circle time. If the alternative to that is to teach the child to ask for a break, that is much better than the inappropriate behavior. Right? So sometimes it's not exactly what we really want. We want the child to be in circle time, right? And certainly we do, that's the goal, but this is going to help the child learn how to get their needs met appropriately. Then we need to figure out, why does the child want to avoid circle time? How could we make it more interesting for them? What are some adaptations that we can do to support them there? But I just want to point that out, that sometimes what the alternative behavior is not exactly what feels good at the time, but it's way better than hitting, kicking, hurting one another. Okay, this is a great, lovely slide, but I'm going to show you the document because it makes much more sense when you see the document. So here's the document that you complete, right? I verbally shared with you. We listen to all the behaviors that the teachers are witnessing in the classroom. We may even hear from family what they've noticed about particular behaviors. We identify one target behavior that we're going to look at, come up with an operational definition, and then start talking about desired behaviors. This is that form. Currently, in your manuals, you have a CD-ROM. I mean, the cassette tape used to seem old, or even an 8-track tape seemed old, but the CD-ROM is now old and outdated, and most computers don't even have capacity to do that. We know this. So the revision is not going to have a CD-ROM, but please know your manuals are still awesome. You will get a link when that is available to the documents, which will be electronically available, which will help because they're PDF versions, so you can type on them, but they're limited space. So it looks a little strange. So what I've done is I've just made my own forms out of Word documents. Or I do the old fashioned way. I just write them out. So one of the things that I've done when I've facilitated this meeting is especially if I was in a room with people, I might project this on an LCD projector, or I certainly would make sure everyone has a copy. And we fill it out together collaboratively. So, and it is as it looks. You go through each one of these. I am going to bring to your attention in your documents or in your manuals, and if you have them there, and you can see my manual is very weathered and used. I use these little flags, these little guys, to document the chapters. So it's really easy to get to where I want to go. And the first place I want to go is to the goal, right? Because that's our first meeting. There are team evaluations at the back of your chapters. This too will be in the revision, where you will have an electronic version of your team assessments. So that's on page 33. And the reason why I'm bringing this to your attention is, one, this is great to photocopy, and have available for you too as a facilitator. Also, I'm bringing it to your attention because there are components in here that are not on this document. And that is that you have a discussion with the team around short-term and long-term goals for this child. So that sense intentionality. Where are we going, right? What do we want to see this child doing or being successful in, right? So we're not just in the here and now, we're also looking more globally. Okay. So as you're filling out this document, I mentioned the word operational definition, and that may be new to some of you, and it may not be new to some of you. But with an operational definition, basically just pretend you're a reporter or you're a camera person, and you would be documenting what you either see or hear. So that's how we define behavior. It's something that you have to hear or see in order for it to be measurable. And so a non-example would be wants control or is manipulating the situation. I would like you all, and if you like to role play, this is a good one for you. Just show me what that looks like. Show me what wants control looks like. Thank you so much for participating. I get some, the hands together, not shaking head, right? We might all have a different version of what that looks like, right? Even when we say tantrum, right? A tantrum looks different from kid to kid to kid. So we want to be a little bit more descriptive. We don't have to be so analytical, but it's really nice to have descriptive words that we can see or hear. So instead of wants control or manipulate the situation, walks away from the adult when asked or told to do something, right? That is something I can see. I can see what that might look like. The rationale behind this is because this helps us take data and make sure that we're taking data appropriately. If we don't know what the behavior looks like, you can't take data on it. Not accurately, at least. Okay, so here are some examples and non-examples. So aggression towards others, hurting others is not descriptive enough. I can hurt you by calling you a name, or I can hurt you by pulling your hair. So we would want more descriptive words, as this example shows. Okay, non-compliant behavior or not following directions, right? That could be a cluster. Wants control, not enough information. But in addition to what I described before, here are some additional comments on what would describe non-compliant behavior. Okay, so let's have a little fun with this, with our reactions. So we all have little reaction tools with our Zoom, that's our little toolbar. And when you hear, or I'm sorry, not when you hear, well, you might hear it because I'll read it. When you hear and see one that is a thumbs up, a operational definition that's a thumbs up, you could put your little thumbs up marker. If you hear something that is maybe a thumbs down, which they don't have on here, which is great, we'll put the oh no emoji. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Oh, I see a thumbs up. Great. All right, here we go. Let's just play. All right, so going down the list. Is disruptive behavior, well, look at that. We'll just do disruptive behaviors. Disruptive behavior, a thumbs up or a thumbs down for operational definition. Oh, I see. Oh, I see all those surprise looks. Oh man, uh-oh. Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, oh, Cindy, look at you with that thumbs down. I didn't know that there was a thumbs down. Nice. Okay, is lying on the floor a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Ooh, Kim said thumb. Nice, look at those thumbs ups. Yes, we can see that, right? It's easy for me to take data on child lying on the floor, you know, not as they're pretending to look underneath a car because they're playing auto shop, but lying on the floor due to behavior, right? Inappropriate play, is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Nice, great. Pushing plate away, pushes plate away. Nice, look at those thumbs up coming up. Wow, you guys are really fast. I'm impressed. And then talks or calls out in a loud voice when teacher is reading a story. Yeah, that's very descriptive, right? We know what that is. We can measure that. Good, great, awesome. So now, oh, look at that. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Okay, now let's look at some positive behaviors, right? Desired behavior. So uses appropriate communication. Use your words is not descriptive enough. And oftentimes we see behavior plans that say Joey will use his words. Which words do we really want to hear from Joey right now? So, right, we might hear some choice words, but that's what we asked him to do. So, not a positive, but an operational definition is when she wants something that another child has, she will say my turn and put her hand out. I'm currently working with a little guy in Vancouver, Oregon, or Washington, where am I sometimes? And this is a situation that they're dealing with right now. This little guy, man, if you're playing with that one thing that he really likes, but he likes a lot of things, and you're from the across the room, he'll find you and he's scratching. This is what his behavior is. And so he can really utilize this skill. Now I'm going to start integrating some of this nuances to some of you. Say this example, and I know this is a little out of context, but this is where we're headed. Say this example, right? A child that has this impulsivity of, I really need to have that toy because that's one of my 10 top favorites. They walk over to that child calmly. They put their hand out and say, my turn. What is now the response? After we taught that child this new behavior, instead of scratching and kicking or hitting. This is a tough one.
They get a positive reinforcement.
They get a positive reinforcement, and what might that be?
Get what they want.
They get that toy. So then what does the plan have to involve? Not just adult behavior change or targeted child change. We got to work with peers too, right? And so that's not always easy for our little 3, 4, and 5-year-olds because they're playing with that toy right now. So some of the work that what we do, I work with Phil quite extensively with the LEAP model project, and those social skills that we teach in pyramid model, like seek attention, sharing, share request, play idea, and give a compliment. Those aren't just made up for because they're cool. Share request in particularly is a big one, right? So when we teach kids that share request, everyone has to share when that friend asks. Cool thing.
Yeah, Lavanya said teach the class as a whole.
Awesome. That's it. Boop, boop, boop. So now it's a whole thing, right? Instead of, oh, it's just, and I'm gonna bring my little friend up. It's he needs to change. He needs to not scratch anymore. It's what we're all learning how to ask for things appropriately. And this child's learning too. And someone mentioned it before. I'm sorry that I can't remember who stated it, but it was lovely. And I said it before, it's we model that behavior, right? Kids will do what they see. And so if we're all working on that, then this little one will be more successful. So the other thing too there is that when we teach that skill, the other friend could ask for it back because it's part of how we're teaching. Eventually, I want you to know we start fading that, right? We start fading that back, and maybe after 1 minute or 30 seconds, you can have that toy. But we want to make sure that Joey knows that this works. It works if I walk over and ask for a toy versus I walk over and I scratch, pull hair, and knock the friend down. Okay, because otherwise that works way better. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what makes this an intensive intervention plan. It's not something that you've never done before. It's just different. Okay. All right, so following directions is obedient. It's not enough, right? We need more. So when asked to do something or given a direction paired with a picture of what they're supposed to do, the child will do it. Also engages in positive social interactions with peers, right? That's a pretty big goal there. Is nice to other children. Not enough information. We really need to get more explicit there. And by the way, thank you for the comments. Is imitates or initiates with or responds to peers by smiling and using words that convey cooperation and positive feelings. I mean, that's pretty lofty and extensive there. We might even want to break that one down a little bit. But that is more detailed than being nice to your friend. Okay, so let's do our little thumbs up, thumbs down. Engaged in circle time. Good, I see some thumbs up. I see some, uh-oh. This is a good one, right? And those of you that put your thumbs up, it's not that you're wrong, because you're not necessarily wrong, right? And even the uh-ohs doesn't mean you're wrong there either. What do we need to operationally define?
What's engaged mean?
What's engaged mean? That's a big one. If you are fluent in teapot language, we have a definition in the teapot around engagement. So that is a definition that you can use, and it's quite large in what engaged is. So I think as a team, that would be a word that you want to define, because what I think might be engaged may be different than what Lisa thinks is engaged. And then if we're marking it differently, we're going to see a skew in the behavior data. Okay, uses blocks in an appropriate manner. Yeah, right? It sounds really positive, but we don't really know what does appropriate mean, right? So we would need more information, so great. And then sit at the table in a chair and complete one closed-ended activity from beginning to end. Yes, positive. Or positive. I keep on saying positive. Thumbs up. Nice. Okay, and then walk from classroom. Sorry, it looks like there we go. Walk from the classroom to the playground while maintaining original place in line. That's a thumbs up. Is it developmentally appropriate? For our little peanuts, it's really hard to walk in a line, isn't it? And so I bring that one up because sometimes those are some of the discussions we have to have. Currently working on with a team that did a behavior support plan for a little girl who was having disruptive behavior, and they were having 20-minute large group time, 5-minute brain break, and then 20-minute large group time. Per the definition on the teapot, that's okay. But is that developmentally appropriate for this little one who's tiny and new to preschool? Not so much, right? So those are sometimes we have to have those conversations. What is developmentally appropriate? Is this a behavior problem, or is this we need to just change things up a little? Or a lot in some cases. Okay, so here's an example of what Jackson's goal setting document looked like. You have Jackson's entire case study too in the Google Drive. Those are documents that I'm going to send to Lisa, hard copy too, in case you weren't able to get into the Google Drive, so you will have access to it. But you can see here, now you saw Jackson. I'm moving all my windows because I have the chat and I have the breakout rooms out. So you saw Jackson, so you were able to see some of those behaviors, right? You saw aggression, getting in kids' space, not accepting play that is not in their terms. We didn't necessarily see that too much in that particular clip. Not engaging, not asking for help. We didn't see that either, but we did see the rough play with peers. So the team decided to work on aggression, okay, rightfully so, because we saw some fairly dangerous behavior there. And so they defined it as pushing, hitting, throwing objects, grabbing, blocking, forcing body into personal space of others, making that hug look, but a little too forceful. We saw at one time that his mouth was open too, so possibly initiating biting. And so this team decided to work on peer-related social skills. So they were really seeing a trend in his play as needing some improvement. Disorganized play, right? He's in and out of center. He was kind of randomly picking up things and then throwing them, not knowing really what to do with materials. So again, this lower part here, when we talk about behavior to increase and desired behavior to target, this is our best guess. This might change as we design the behavior support plan. In a lot of cases, teams are very attuned to what the child needs. And then there's going to be some cases where teachers have zero idea at first on where to start. because it's just too overwhelming. So just know that that can change, and then we make a note of it on the data, because that's where we're headed next. How are your discussions? Great, good.
Therapeutic. Just kidding. No. They were really good. We got to take a chance to use the definitions correctly and try to make the wording the way that PTR-YC would want the wording. And we definitely noticed one thing that was nice was Leanne had brought it up that if you're looking for the proper wording for the behaviors to decrease, if you're already doing BIRs, the wording it's there for you already.
Lovely. Yeah, thanks for making that connection, because that is certainly something that we're trying to do at NCPMI is to share with people that the BIR is a great tool for some of this detective work. Good, fantastic. So your operational definitions are outlined in your BIRs. Lovely. Good.
Denise would be so happy to hear that.
Yeah, and I think what they ended up doing, or what we ended up doing too, was coming up with the increase, or the goal that we want to increase, right? But then realizing that maybe it was too easy of a goal, or might be something that they already can do. So then it was a more challenging goal that might encompass that smaller goal. So it was just nice to hear that conversation go back and forth. And we already had a few BIRs from this child already. So it was doing this assessment, you know, in real time, but practicing before the referral even came yet. So
fantastic. Any other reflections? Lisa, when you said therapeutic, I have to say, and it's just a tip, and it doesn't mean that this is how, if you're facilitating these meetings, that it's always going to be that way. But this tends to be a fairly emotional meeting for some of our teams and families. So, you know, just maybe bring a box of tissues or
Yeah.
Because this is sometimes the first time that a team is able to gather and just like decompress. Ideally, it's not, right? But sometimes. So I will also share with you, and I know some of you have heard this because I usually do talk about this, is that you never know what's going to happen during this meeting. You might learn things that you had no idea were going on. I had a scenario where a family shared with us in pure confidence and despair that they had zero electricity in their home. They were turning off their heat in the dead of winter in Colorado, and the mother hadn't eaten in 3 days because she was running out of food for her kids. And so clearly our meeting changed, right? Because we weren't going to plow through this. Okay, well, let's stay focused on, you know, what behavior we want to increase. We need to get this mom support, get her heat in her home and electricity and food. And so the meeting became more of a triage meeting, really, as far as, okay, here's we got those resources. We figured out who can help support this parent. By the end of the day, there were all sorts of organizations that were supporting and helping. And that, if we did not address those issues, the child's likelihood of the behavior plan being successful was unlikely. And we don't know what's going on all the time, right? And sometimes we never know. But if we can help create some safety and security for families to share some other things that might be happening and contributing to these behaviors, that's really important. So just be aware that this is a time where we can learn a lot about kids and their families and teachers and what they're going through too. So
Can I share?
Absolutely. I
To
have
bounce off what you just said, I started using PTR-YC last year because I had the training a little earlier, and I learned that my first meeting, I had to always allot a longer amount of time because I like to go right into processes and do all the things. But I realized that most of the people sitting in the meeting needed some time to vent and let it all out because they couldn't get to the process part until they said what they needed to say. So we have a longer meeting the first time around for sure.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And so very true, right? And if you have, you know, if you don't need all that time, then you get out early and then everyone's buckets are full. But yeah, no, that is very true for this meeting. It seems so easy, or it seems like, oh, this won't take us long at all. We'll just schedule a half hour during nap time. And I would advise not to do that. The other thing that sometimes happens is that teams try to do goal setting and the data piece, and that's sometimes really tricky too. I find that more successful when you're working with veteran teams that have been doing PTR-YC for a while. They've had a few under their belt. They understand this idea of identifying one behavior. Those goal setting meetings usually roll a little smoother than when it's their first time. So just to keep that in mind. All right, so we have just under 30 minutes left. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to introduce you to our data collection process through PTR-YC. So say if you're using BIR data and you all decide that, okay, this makes sense for us to move forward to PTR-YC, we roll you over into a different data collection system. And there's a lot of validity behind the data tool that we recommend. So I'll just share that with you today. And then tomorrow we'll play a little bit and we'll continue moving forward with our functional behavior assessment. Because this is part of functional behavior assessment, right? Trying to figure out why is this behavior going on. New screen. So I'm not going to say anything about this video. You're just going to listen and follow along with the prompts.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
So the reason why we show this video is because sometimes our brain gets primed to see a particular behavior in a child. And that could be whatever is priming our brain, whether it's their last name, whether it's that they're the spitter, so you see spitting more often, or the escaper or the runner. I've heard that, oh, watch out, he's a runner, or he's a biter, right? Whether there are other variables too, right? Which we know with equity and equality, we also need to take into consideration, are we using implicit bias in our decision making when we're looking at children and their behaviors? And so when our brain is primed to see a particular behavior, that's what we see, right? So when they primed your brain before you saw that video, and count how many passes the players in white are passing the ball, that's what you were primed to look at. And some of you may have missed the other variables that were going on. And so it's really important that even though we're focusing on these operational definitions, right, that we also prime our brain to look globally and to see the whole picture. And in addition, and this is what validates the tool that I'm going to introduce you to, we want to look at positive behavior too. Sometimes that's the deficit of behavior data, is that we're only looking at inappropriate behavior and we're missing the opportunities that the child's actually using. And Chris was saying it, right? Wow, this kid can actually do these skills, but we're missing those opportunities because we're so focused on the inappropriate behavior. Okay, so very important. And so what has been created is this really cool tool, which is a perceptional tool, which I'll show you in a moment. But when we dive into this meeting, it sometimes seems kind of stale, like, oh, great, we're going to talk about how we're going to collect data. But this is kind of where the excitement happens. We're going to actually learn more about how often is this behavior occurring during, potentially, during this time that we targeted. So during your goal setting meeting, you're also asking the teachers, and this is sometimes tricky, but with BIR data, you can see when does this behavior occur most often, or when is it the most challenging time? So it might be circle time, it might be center time, it might be recess, right? It might be playing on the playground. Whenever that time is, that's the time that we're going to focus in on. That's the time that we're going to take data. We're not taking data throughout the day. The rationale behind that is we don't want to hunt for behavior all day, right? We want to refine our skill in teaching a child a new behavior and reinforcing that, and that takes enough time and energy. So there's one time during the day that we take this behavior data. And then as a team, you decide what that's going to look like. As a team, you decide what are you going to measure? Are you going to measure intensity? Are you going to measure frequency, duration? Depending upon what that behavior is, you will make your mind up. So it's nice that we're not telling you, oh, this is what you have to do. In your manual, you have some examples of how to collect data, which is really helpful, and I highly recommend looking through that. The other thing is we need to decide who is taking data and where will the data be collected, like or kept, right? Because oftentimes that's some of the issues. I don't even know where the data sheet is. Right? Or, oh, only I collect data because I'm the lead teacher, or I'm the early childhood special educator. But really, we want everyone to be able to feel comfortable to collect data, because then we're getting multiple eyes on the behavior. Okay, so in your manual, you're going to see two different forms. You're going to see a frequency data form, and you're going to see what's called a behavior rating scale form. We recommend that you use the behavior rating scale form. This is an adaptation that we're making in the revision. is that we're going to focus on teaching this behavior rating scale. With that said, it doesn't mean you cannot use the frequency data tool. It's just that we find a lot of value in this behavior rating scale, which looks like this, and I'll explain it versus looking at those PowerPoints, is that with this data tool, you can have multiple days, up to a month worth of information on one sheet. We're looking at the inappropriate behavior or the challenging behavior, as well as the desired behavior. So we're collecting that behavior at the same time during that designated time during the day that or routine that we have decided as a team to collect the data on. Okay? It makes more sense as we go through it, and that's why I'm going to break before we do some work around this, so you have a fresh brain tomorrow for us to play around with this.
Johanna, we had a question about, so could you talk a little bit more about the correlation between the BIR and this? Because that's the question. Like, when do you go from BIR collection to this?
I would say when you know, just as you go through the PTR-YC process, right? So your first meeting, you could still take BIR data even with your first meeting, because you're talking about goal setting. Not until you get to this meeting would I say you transition to this tool, if that feels good for you as a team, right? I don't think many of us would say absolutely not. You can never use a BIR during a behavior support plan, you know, to measure that behavior, especially if you're very fluent in using the BIR, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Using that tool versus, okay, shaking up the group and saying, now we're going to do this. I think what would be important not to miss out on or to consider as a team is the validity behind this tool. And when you have a visual representation of the trends instantly, you know, like, and I know that you're probably using the Excel spreadsheet too with the BIR as well, right? And
just during this training, even there's been a couple of private chats about like timing too. So when you're working with a program, they've been collecting BIR data with the child, and they've come up with a support plan to help a child. Is there any kind of guidance you can give the participants today, like about how much time? Because that's something that comes up. How much time do you stick with your behavioral support plan before you start saying, we need to do more, we need to really dig in to PTR-YC?
yeah, so you're talking about like creating like a targeted, like a tier 2 target support, like
when you go back to try, like how you started us off today, you know, you go back to the base, you go back to your tier 1 and tier 2, and you're working on that. And then you're seeing that it's not, the behaviors are still there, or sometimes even accelerating. Is there guidance you give to programs about like, how long do you stick with what you're doing?
Yeah, you know, there's never, I mean, I don't want to say never, but it's not perfect science all the time. There isn't like, oh, it's absolutely this day, that's when you want to go for it. But generally speaking, when we create some sort of targeted support, whether it's a, you know, in tier 2, that target, let's modify some of these universal practices or targeted practices to help support this child. Or it's a behavior support plan, generally speaking, within 8 to 10 days of the child receiving intervention support, we should see some change in behavior. Positive change.
Yeah.
Taking into consideration that sometimes there's what's called extinction bursts, where if you're using, say, planned ignoring or trying to change your response to the inappropriate behavior, you may see an increase of that challenging behavior and or a new form of a challenging behavior, right? So you want to take that into consideration too. Tomorrow we will go through some of those steps as far as what you look at, like, are you implementing what we said we were going to do with a high fidelity? Is everyone on board? Are we being consistent? If there's any inconsistencies that could affect child's behavior, right? Well, it still works with you. It doesn't work with you, but it still works with you. So I'm going to do what I'm doing, right?
Thank you. I know we're going to talk more about it tomorrow, but please keep the questions coming. I know sometimes it's hard to bring up questions with the whole group, but you can email me before tomorrow's training or just send me private chats like you've been doing if you have questions. I don't want anyone to finish the training tomorrow with questions. So while we have Johanna here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it look like now? Why don't we have that? Like, it's, let's see what time it is. We can wrap up today with talking about that. What does it look like currently? When you guys do BIR data, how long do you do BIR data and targeted supports until you roll into a behavior support plan? And sometimes we wait too long. Sometimes we don't go too quick too, but sometimes we wait too long. So I'd love to hear from all of you. Like, what does it currently look like?
I think at HRA, it all depends on the behaviors, because there are some that you really can't sit and wait on for too long. And then there are others where you want to see what kind of happens, you know, the teacher wants to give it a whirl, you know, and they're trying certain strategies that maybe have worked in the past before they actually start submitting forms or BIRs. And then once we start getting the BIRs and tracking it, it really just depends. There's really been no set time. You're gonna feel when it's right. Okay, it's gone far enough. Now we have to try something else. And it does not necessarily, nothing monumental has to happen. It just has to be enough. Okay, this isn't going to change. X, Y, and Z has been tried.
Yeah, Lisa, it's like, it's not necessarily the length of time that you've been documenting, it's the intensity of what's going on. And it's also about how much communication has been going to the family and how much input the family's had. Is the family ready to hear that we want to do a little bit more at this point?
Good. Yeah, for sure. And of course, like involving families from the get-go too, versus you're going through this process and all of a sudden you're saying, hey, we think we need to do a behavior support plan on your kiddo, right? That's sometimes hard to hear from families. So have you guys seen any of the examples of like flowcharts of what to, like the protocols and timelines that way? Yeah. Okay.
That's something we were just working on here at our program, and we've that's what we've been working on with Sue and here at our program, a flowchart, and that does include some kind of, you know, timeline and, you know, how long we do want to work on implementing, you know, working on a specific skill and some strategies together. So that is something that we're working on, because and what would a time frame look like, you know, to implement some support for the student before, you know, in working with the families and the staff here. So that's something that we're working on here.
Lovely.
Yeah, and one of our programs, and Johanna, so I can let you know, a lot of our programs just had BIR training a few weeks ago. So a lot of this is all brand new, and that's why I wanted you to give as much clarification, because it's a lot to get. And when you get all these trainings, one right after the other, you know, we did program-wide leadership team training, and then we did the practice-based coaching, and then we did, and it's just like, all the program coaches that are on from cohort 1, we went through the whole first year just kind of learning. And then when you go through it again the second time, which we have a lot of our cohort 1 are rejoining, and it's just a whole different experience, right? I think everybody on this call who's done it before. So I really appreciate all of you for, anything you're sharing, because if you have a question, it's most certainly a question for other people too. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. Yale New Haven Hospital Daycare Centers is in our cohort 1, and they spent a lot of time this year on that flow chart, and I did share it with all of the programs. It's a great resource, and actually Deb sent it to Angela, and they're going to put it on the NCPMI website. Yeah.
Good. Great.
So if anybody didn't get to see that and wants to, let me know, but it will be available in the next couple weeks on the website too.
Fantastic.
And it has BIR and PTR-YC right in it, so you see where during the flow chart to use those things, but
Great.
lots of conversations.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Question.
Yeah, I had a question about isn't it kind of like a seamless transition from a family perspective, whether you're going from tier 2 to tier 1? Like the family may not even really notice. It just may be that this is another conversation. This is just we're trying something different. It's not a negative, oh, we're pulling out the hard stops and we're using a different form, or right? It's seamless.
Yes. Yeah.
Just more support.
Yeah, ideally that's what we want, right? We want it to not feel so categorized, oh, we all start at tier 1, and then some of us go to tier 2 and some of us go to tier 3. It's really this idea of we're up and down, right? We're going up and down the pyramid to help support kids and families, and that should just feel like all part of it, not that they're going to the next category. So I like that you mentioned that for sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of validity with those flow charts too. That helps. And, with your benchmarks of quality that you got from the program wide, that we look at that. Do you have that in place? And honestly, we could have examples. It's lovely that you guys have a example from Yale's center, and then make it your own. Make it what will work for realistically for your program too. And we just have a couple of minutes left, but I would say that sometimes it's this fine balance of too quick and not quick enough. Generally speaking, when we start PTR-YC cases, we really do look at the whole child and the needs and this and that, but oftentimes we see a change in the behavior right at the FBA or before the FBA. Some of our kids didn't even make it to getting to the behavior plan because their behaviors went away completely. And sometimes it's just those meetings of sitting down and talking do we have this in place? And that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll finish talking about data collection. You'll do a little activity around anchor scores because that's the trickiest part about BIRs, not BIRs, BRS. And we could still brainstorm a little bit more about this fluidity between the BIR and the BRS. And then we'll talk about FBA and we'll write plans. And then we talk about what it looks like after a plan is written and what happens. Okay, so thank you all so much for your time and attention. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Johanna. You'd never know that you weren't feeling well.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow And we really appreciate everything you do. So thank you. Have a good afternoon and evening.